Yes. So now, on to the next part, what to do instead. So, the next, this part is about using kind of like they say the fear and pleasure framework, and I already have it in the workbook. So this is what you are gonna do to like actually making changing your mindset to actually start practicing. So write down on the comment, like, because I don't speak this language fluently, I am missing out on. What are you missing out on?
So yeah, so for me it'd be because I don't speak Spanish fluently, I'm missing out on well, my dad's side of the family all speaks Spanish, so I'm missing out on the conversations that they have.
Yeah. So for me, also, I don't speak Spanish fluently yet. I am kind of like Antonio, which is like I know a lot of vocabularies. I can write Spanish, but when I am talking to Spanish native speakers, I am always stuttering. So that's like what I am missing is to talk with a lot of people that I am interested in, because they have like different, there are a lot of native speakers here in the United States. Like one day I met a guy from Venezuela in the train station, and they could hold like a tiny conversation, and I was thinking like, oh, what would I have, like what can I talk with this person, like, and ask him if only I was able to speak Spanish fluently.
Yeah, and there's a comment in here asking about being nervous when talking to a native speaker. And I would say, as someone who is a native speaker, and I often talk to people who are non-native English speakers, I don't mind talking to people who aren't native English speakers, but it is a little bit more difficult, so I can only handle so much of that at a time. But I don't mind at all what it is, and I'll even try to help out, trying to guess what you're trying to say. The big thing is, as long as you're not getting frustrated, you just have to try to describe what you're thinking in other ways. But really just practicing it and learning that, it's not going to be a bad experience trying to speak to somebody who is a native speaker. You just kind of have to learn. You're going to have to use, if a native speaker doesn't know what you're talking about, you'll have to describe it in different ways. One thing I notice that Ans will do sometimes is, when you don't know something, you'll describe it in the same way over again, thinking that will help me, and it doesn't. And then some frustration builds. But if you can describe it in one way, and if they don't understand it, you can describe it in another way, and then try describing it in a third way. And eventually, there will be enough connection points that the native speaker will be like, oh, I know what you're talking about. This is what you were trying to say.
Yeah, so he also said, he also asked,
yes, it is normally stressful, and it does go away once you get used to it. It's just something like, once you realize like this is a normal thing for you to feel, and it's a normal process of learning the language, then it'll start to go away, because you'll realize like this is how you learn the language.
Yes. I also want to say, if you are like trying to speak to native speakers, what can help a lot is, even if you are speaking like a broken English, if you speak slowly, something that is very difficult for me because I'm not like that, but I see that I've attended different conferences and seminars, and I've seen like people who are like speaking English with a very thick accent, but because they were speaking so slowly, my brain has enough time to process and understand what they were talking about.
Yeah, it also helps me when if you have a really thick accent and you're not saying it, then or saying things quite correctly, also speaking it slowly helps me as a native speaker because I can figure out, okay, this is the word they were saying, this is what they meant to say here, and I have time to put things together. But if you speak really fast with a thick accent, it makes it so almost nobody can follow what you're saying. But yeah, speaking slowly gives people time to figure out what are the individual words. It helps out a lot.
Yeah. And don't speak very loud.
Yeah, louder doesn't always help.
Yeah.
Enunciating can.
Yeah. And also, speaking good English is not equals to speaking English fast or speaking any languages fast.
Yeah. This is. There's some in India, I believe. They believe that speaking a language well means that you can speak the language fast. The faster you can speak it, the better you can speak it. That's what they believe, but it's not true. I've seen them speaking the language, and they will try to like say the whole sentence into just like a few seconds, and I listen to it and I'm like, I don't even know what they're saying. I know that those are English syllables and they've all just been put together, but English, it's a rhythmic language. You say it in a very specific rhythm. And so you can pick up on this rhythm as it's being said. And if you break that rhythm, then it's harder for people to understand. So I was just kind of like going along with the rhythm of how I was talking with my hand.
Yeah.
But you can do that with pretty much anything. You can even start to pick out certain things like how we do inflections throughout the sentence or how we do inflections in the same word or things like that. But it's a very rhythmic language.
Yeah, definitely true.
What was it? We went to English Connection one time, and one of the things that was said in there was there was a movie called Pink Panther. Da-da, 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 da-da. And they would, I don't know one of the sentences off the top of my head, but they were giving some examples of people speaking, and you could play these beats in the background, and you could hear that they were saying the sentence in that same rhythm.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got a little bit off topic, but yeah, those were good questions.
Yeah, the next things that you also need like to write down is how is like your future self once you will be able to speak fluently? Like having a vivid image of yourself speaking the language is definitely boost your motivation. Like if I were able to speak fluently, just like sit down and think that you already speak that language fluently, like right now, what doors is open for a lot of people. It's something like scholarships or like opportunity to like volunteering abroad, which is you really need to speak the language fluently because a lot of the native of the country that you are going to visit will not speak your own language. So those would be something that you can list and say, okay, I really, really want to get this thing. So I really, really want to learn this language.
Yeah, well, and one thing I'd noticed when I started learning Spanish, I wanted to learn it so I could speak to my dad's side of the family. And I wanted to go and visit them and be able to talk with them or talk with my abuelita or my aunts and uncles, because when they would talk to each other, they would talk to each other in Spanish. And it's like, if I learned Spanish, I could talk to them like they were having, like when they were having fun conversations, they would talk in Spanish. When they were having serious conversations, they would talk in English because they were usually talking to us kids. So if I could learn Spanish, it was like I can be part of those fun conversations. Something I didn't know about speaking Spanish or a different language is that when you learn a different language, you'll notice that there are words that they either use differently or they have two separate words. Like in English, we have one word for, the word for, we use like, hey, this is for you. Or let's see, what is the other? And it's hard for me to think about it in English, but in Spanish, they have por, P-O-R, and para, P-A-R-A, and until I learned Spanish, I didn't really think of the two different uses of the word. And that's kind of a simple example, but it helps you kind of say, look at your own language and say, oh, these are two different things, two different ideas that I have. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but your brain works kind of funny. It'll combine these two ideas that may not actually be the same, and it kind of allows it to separate it and allows you to think about things a little bit more clearly. Por and para was just kind of like the one of the very common ones in Spanish, but there are other words when you learn a language, you'll learn that in this other language, they use two different words to convey what you may have always done with a single word in your language, or vice versa. And you can it allows you to think more broadly, or even better, it allows you to describe things more accurately. So Ans is starting to learn Spanish, and I know Spanish, and so I can use a Spanish word to describe something that I would only be able to vaguely describe. I could more accurately describe it in Spanish because the language is more descriptive for this particular word. Anyway, that's something I didn't expect to do, but that is something, if I were able to speak Spanish more fluently, I would have a better vocabulary, although it may not be English vocabulary. It helps me think through some of these ideas a little bit easier.
Yeah, something that I've learned like very recently is like the difference between adversary and opponent, because in French we use the same word adversaire. So yeah.
Adversary in English means someone who is fighting against you, usually in a malicious way, like trying to defeat you, but not in terms of like a game, but in terms of like they do not like you and they don't want you to succeed in life. Like that's what an adversary is. But an opponent is someone who is trying to beat you in like a game or something like that. So they are very different meanings. One is opponent is more playful and adversary is more serious. And so if you say that someone is your adversary, it doesn't necessarily translate in the same way that opponent does. There was also the word experiment and experience.
Yeah.
In French, that's also the same word. Experiment. What is the word in French?
Experiment is experience. Experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So in English, experience is like, what have I done in my life? Like, I have had the experience of going on a live show. Because I'm here, this is a thing that I've done before. That's what an experience is. But a experiment is setting up a test and then doing an experiment. It's like testing something to see what happens. But those are the same in French, and in English, those are two completely different words. And I actually didn't even think about them the same way. But it was pointed out to me that those were the same words in French, and yeah, I could, in the same way in English, there are some words that are the same, that are like the same word in English but are different in another language, and it kind of expands your mind to separate experience and experiment. It lets you think, okay, one is kind of, yeah, these things I was doing was like testing what's happening and what should happen, whereas the other one is experience, is saying like, these are things that happened to me. One experiment kind of said, I'm testing things. I'm seeing what happens if I change this thing, or what happens if I do this? What is the result? And some really interesting things when you start to learn another language fluently, but not entirely something you would know until you started learning that language.
Yeah. Okay, so now is the time to craft your success plan. So the first things that you need to do is to evaluate your actual level. And to do so, there are already free language tests on the internet for languages like English, Spanish, Chinese, like all of the kind of like the major language. You can do that for free. If you are like trying to learn Malagasy, for example, then you really need a native speaker to actually see your level. So in the workbook, I put different free English tests that you can take. I can show it here. Let me go through. Okay. I am gonna need to remove this.
Well, I was just thinking you could go ahead to the slide where you had it, which is just the next slide, I think.
No, I don't have it in the next slide. Yeah. So.
Well, you have it on here later, and you'll point it out then.
Yeah. So.
But it's also in the workbook.
In the workbook. So even if it's not there, if you are learning other languages, you just need to go to your web browser and write free and the language test, and you can use that. There are not tests that is like recognized by universities or something like that, but though it's only for yourself to evaluate your level and craft an actual plan for you. So that is step number 1. Step number 2 is, you can do that in the workbook, is to evaluate the resources that are available to you. So you need to ask yourself, how many hours or minutes do you have each day to commit to practice, so that you are not going to be thinking that you can do more than you could. And when you are talking about like minutes, you don't just think like, how many big chunk of time can I have? You can squeeze learning languages in between classes, for example. Even if you have like 5 minutes, that's already one Duolingo lesson. Yeah. So next thing is, what materials do you already have? Don't think about what you don't have. Don't think like, I don't have a smartphone, I don't have this, I don't have that. Just write it down. If you have a notebook, cool. If you have flashcards, cool. If you have phone, if you have a laptop, just write it down there.
Think about what you do have and how to use that already to help you learn your language. Like notebook, if you just have paper, you can fold that up and cut it out into note cards, and you can use those as flashcards with one word on one side and your native language on one side and the language you're learning on the other. And you don't need scissors to cut it up. I mean, you can fold that and crease it until the paper breaks on its own, and you can get very nice straight edges. Anyway, lots of things that you can do that you don't need expensive material. Like if you don't have a laptop, you don't need a laptop, but you can kind of get around it.
And the next one is, where can you access the internet? You may need to go to an internet cafe, or it's also okay even if you have to borrow somebody's phone for a minute and you're gonna buy them like data. It's okay, but you just need to know where can you access the internet. You don't need to have it like available 24/7. You just need to see where can you get it.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you know your resources, it's the time to craft your learning objective.